when it comes to like pro-black and stuff. So
Yeah.
at that particular segment, they kind of started talking about like just kind of getting into the complaining. And I feel like all her lives were somehow becoming about Black Americans. So I just kind of asked, like, why did we have to make everything about us? And this guy got so mad at me, like he ended up getting off the live. So
Oh Lord.
right.
What guy was it? I wonder.
I had actually never saw him before. His name was Mac or something.
Uh,
Yeah, I had never seen him before. He was
mm,
like new to the whole little community.
yeah.
But yeah. So the only thing I pretty much saw from you is that one a little bit,
Yeah.
as well as the interview. And then I also watched your one with Antonio Batista.
Oh, the very first one. Yeah,
Oh,
that's the
you have
first.
another one?
No, that's the first one that I uploaded. The first thing that I uploaded onto YouTube. I had done a couple guest spots on different podcasts, but they're Spanish language podcasts. And Antonio was the first time I'm like, all right, I might as well like start a channel, I guess. And so I had reached out to Antonio. Not, I never really saw the one where he flipped out till after the interview, the one where he's like monkey people and all that shit. I hadn't seen that one. Um, yeah,
Oh,
I hadn't seen that one. I just seen another one where he's like, angry, but he's like talking some real shit. It's like, it's fair from where he's coming from. And
right.
and so I decided to reach out to him. But then we've kind of like, as I've shared deeper my thought much deeper in the way I see things, along with kind of everyone who's having that conversation with me, it seems like we kind of had like a falling apart. And it was really funny how it happened, because it really happened at the same time where like early on I had talked to Radical Latino, but it's like they both blew up at the same time, like in my face. And I realized like they're both pushing a line that I just feel is not authentically Hispano, It's like, it's a white boy from America trying to be Hispano type thing. So it's a very
Right.
gringo, both of their worldviews. One's just like very left leaning. The other one's very like kind of right leaning, if you want to call it that. But yeah, so I guess, kind of what I've done, the lane that I've kind of carved out is just really trying to discover what are the roots of Hispanidad, right? Trying to kind of
I'm
pin.
recording, by the way. I
Yeah,
just
I see
started
that.
recording because you started talking. I'm like, okay, let me just get into it.
I'm like messing with the camera aspect since I still had a chance to. So yeah, what I've done is, over the last year or so is kind of, I guess, philosophize or take apart, obviously through my experience and my reading, but take apart and kind of pinpoint what is Hispanidad to make it a term, right? Is it this biological thing? Is it this cultural thing? What are the roots of this culture? What are the roots of this worldview? And that's really what the conversation has been about. I think for a lot of people, the reaction has been surprising, because I think a lot of people, when they hear this stuff in a vacuum, they think, oh, this guy's like a misogynist or a racist or a white supremacist, whatever stupid label. But I think when people actually sit down and listen, even if they're coming from a different point of view, there's something that resounds. It makes sense, because I think what I put is kind of like, what I put forth is something very old fashioned that I think all humans can kind of relate to. I think like we can all think of a time when maybe we all kind of saw the world this way. And simply because we're modern Americans, we've kind of strayed from that line. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that's kind of been it. I think, I've hit a couple sensitive strings in people. But I think at the same time, they kind of like what I'm saying. So it's like they have a hard time with me. They want to write me off, but they're having a hard time doing it, which is good. I think that's a good spot to be in.
Where no one can define you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or if you do, you're simply being dishonest by trying to like fit me into this like little cookie cutter position that is really arbitrary. People are much more nuanced than kind of mainstream American politics.
Right. So, okay, so y'all like, I guess now I'm talking to the audience because I haven't done a pre-recorded video like in forever. But
Hmm.
so this is OG del Rancho,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hello,
and
hello.
you're not Mexican.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm from Nicaragua. Viva Nicaragua. Yeah.
Does that vibe not give you a Mexican? Does that name not give you a Mexican vibe?
Some people think that, but it's like, we have ranchos too, it's like,
Right.
we're about that ranchero life as well. I think what it does, it shows that there's something pre-Mexico and there's something pre-Nicaragua, which only affirms kind of what I put forth, which is like we should absorb our Spanish root. Even if we genetically don't have Spanish in us, our culture is informed by that Spanish root, right? I like to frame it as like,
can you give me one second?
Yeah, no
I don't know why okay, so your name is Noel.
Yes. I'm not Mexican.
You're not Mexican. You're from Nicaragua.
Yeah, but I grew up in LA, so that kind of makes me a Mexican by default, But
right.
Yeah. Even Nicaragua, you can't, one of the things that I like to put forth that kind of gets some Hispanos in a bunch sometimes is when I claim that our countries are very arbitrary because like they didn't exist until after a certain war when, these kind of groups of rich, powerful men who were calling shots basically decided, okay, this is the country and this is what we're going to call ourselves. And this is the myth we're making up in order to build these countries on. So they're kind of arbitrary. They're kind of enforced. But, one of the ways that I describe Nicaragua is kind of geographically, Nicaragua's in the middle of three principal Hispano cities. You could say Havana, Cuba, Mexico City, Mexico, and Bogota, Colombia. So it being kind of in the middle, it's kind of a weird fusion of all three in a very small scale. Nicaragua is a very small, underpopulated country. So yeah, that's what I bring from it. So, with Mexicans, they're going to say I'm black. With Cubans, they're going to say I'm Mexican. With Colombians, they're going to say I'm Cuban, So it's just kind of, it's a funny thing. Very, very Hispano.
That's interesting. Do you ever, so especially living on the West Coast, I think I can only recall one person that I've met of Nicaraguan descent.
Uh-huh.
So how commonplace is it for you to find people from that country?
Yeah, no, it's not very common here in LA. And if you do find them, they'll tend to be half Salvadorian, half Mexican, half Cuban. They'll be half something else. There's very few Nicaraguans in LA. There's a sizable community in Miami, but the same thing there. All the Hispano countries tend to fuse. So there isn't that many. I think worldwide there's like 5 million Nicaraguans, and there's about 14 million people in Southern California, LA, Orange County. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a very small, underpopulated. It's about the size of Georgia, so it's about a medium-sized state, but it's just not very densely populated.
Wow, that's interesting. And I noticed in the interview you had with Xena, you were basically telling her how it has such a wide spectrum of people. And I think
that person you met, what did they look like?
He actually looked, I feel like he was very racially ambiguous. And it was interesting because he was from Miami, but lived in Germany, and I met him in Mexico City. So he was like very first of all, a hipster. And I don't even know what he looked like. Like his beard was kind of scruffy, but his hair was more like kind of curly, but not. So he just looked racially ambiguous. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, that's how I would describe a big chunk of Nicaraguans. There's, like I said, there's few people who are kind of pure, who look more like black, clearly, or white, or Indian, but most of them look like a mix of those three things at different extents,
Right.
I want to know more about you, though. I was curious because I saw some of your videos, and I thought that was really interesting, funny perspective, and it kind of made me kind of, I guess, go back in time to, like high school years and see how like different people molded or dealt with things. How did you're from Atlanta or you're from LA? How did you end up mixing or touching with Hispanos?
So I'm actually from Las Vegas.
Got you.
But I spent a lot of my childhood in Atlanta, the suburbs of Atlanta. So
Decatur?
I went back and forth a lot.
Mm.
So it's interesting because when I lived in Vegas, it was very like Mexican, Asian, Black, white.
Mm-hmm.
But in Atlanta, it was like where I lived, Black, Dominican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Cambodian,
Really?
Indian, everybody but white.
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been to Atlanta. I really like Atlanta. It's nice to see like a Black American city, really, and kind of get a fuller strata of Black Americans as opposed to just like the hood fools. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole cross section of Black people there from, who have like the third in their last name, Ed William the third or something like that. So it's like they come from these like Black blue blood families. And it's funny to see like, one of the things I noticed is that everyone in Atlanta is so polite, even like the guy with a grill on and like 24-inch rims, like he talks in a respectful manner that, it's just that Southern hospitality hasn't left the culture down there. So I like Atlanta. There's a jazz club that I used to go to in downtown. And then there's like Mary Mac's. It's like the soul food spot. Yeah. Atlanta's pretty cool. So
Mary Mac's tea room.
Tea room, exactly. So you, I guess, bump shoulders with Hispanics more in Atlanta than in Vegas, or both?
No, both sides. So in Vegas, my experience was Mexicans.
Yeah.
Then in Atlanta, it was just everybody. Like I've met people from Uruguay, like all types of people, except for Nicaragua.
Yeah. There's very few of us.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting to point that difference because I think it's kind of the same thing where I was talking about like people might have this impression of Black people if they've never gone to Atlanta or seen another city like that. And I think with Mexicans it happens the same way where most of the Mexican immigrants in the Southwest tend to be from peasant class. So like Mexicans from middle or upper class, they don't need to leave their country. They'll come here on vacation, you know what I'm saying? So it's like if you interact with Mexicans, chances are you're only going to deal with kind of, peasant farmers really from, very remote parts of the country. You got to remember Mexico's a very big country as well. So you're not really seeing, people from like the big cities. You're not really seeing upper middle class people or upper class people. You're seeing kind of more of the salt of the earth type of people. Whereas the cross section of Hispanos in the East Coast, like in Miami, especially, or I kind of group Atlanta because I think people from Miami go up to Atlanta. You're going to get way more of a different cross section, different countries, but you're going to see more immigration from middle and upper class people. These are professionals who, like they might have a doctor degree, but there's no way to make money in their country, so they come here and drive a cab or something. You know what I mean? So it's a very different socioeconomic class of people. So that compounds that difference between people might think, oh, this is what Mexicans are like, and these are like what South Americans are like. But really, they're not that different. It's just you're seeing different classes of them. And sometimes people think that transcends, national boundaries. But you see that same dynamic. It's like you'll have a class of people in Colombia that you might refer to as like the Mexicans. Like there's this joke in Colombia, but it's true about every country that the lower class people want to be Mexican, right? So they listen to Mexican music and they kind of want to live that country life that, when you said rancho, the middle class ones want to be Americans and the upper class ones want to be Europeans. So it's like, when you're dealing with people more from peasant class, working class people, they're kind of going to be more Mexican no matter what country they're from. At least an outsider might interpret it that way.
Interesting.
Because it's country living, you know what I mean? I chose that name because it's like that's where I feel the most happiest. I feel happiest when I'm in the earth, when I'm outside, when I'm working with the sun, when I'm working with the soil. And I think there's like we romance that as Hispanos. There's like a romance. There's a love for that type of lifestyle or nature. So I wanted to connect myself to that.
That's interesting.
You said you dated some Hispanic guys. Where were they from? Or tell me more. I'm curious about that. I want to know more of a Black woman's perspective on Hispano men because it seems like, I think one of the things we have in common is that you're more blunt and honest about things that sometimes people feel like, oh, that's, you're not supposed to say that out loud. And I don't condone that. I think you should call things the way they are, because, you know, a good friend is the one who tells you have shit between your teeth. A fake one kind of smiles and says, you're all right. You know what I mean? So it's like, be a good friend to people and just tell them what's up, even if they get offended. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that. I want to understand that better.
So to keep it real with you, I haven't really been dating in my last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my experiences are limited to like young adulthood, very early adulthood,
Right.
and adolescence, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's interesting because, just like as a sidebar, I found growing up in Vegas, the Mexicans that I was encountering were more like first generation, second generation, third generation. Like, they've been here for a minute. But in Georgia, the Mexicans are more like fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because the Mexican kids I grew up around here, now it just kind of depends, because some of them I noticed they'll either like cling more to like a Colombian or Dominican, just like whatever's kind of hip. But then a lot of them that I knew out here were like, they love the big trucks. They like to race the trucks. They listen to the music. There's a club out here called Espacio, and it's like very Mexican. So that was like a really thing. So out here it was interesting because a lot of them were really into that ranchero, whatever.
Life.
Like, yeah. They were really into that.
Yeah.
But the ones in that I was growing up with in Las Vegas, they were more like West Coast, you know, Lil Rob, like that kind of
Americanized.
life.
Yeah.
Right.
They're more
like
cholo.
Hispano.
They're more, pochos. That's what a pocho is. It's a Hispanic or Mexican born and raised in the U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyways, back to me. The funny thing is, I've never had a black boyfriend in my life.
That's funny.
And literally since I was a kid, I just don't know. I guess, like, I don't know. All my boyfriends have been Hispanic, literally from the time I was in like second grade all the way up. And I have dated a Dominican. But I don't know. The experience, it's kind of like, I guess I don't have much to compare it to, like, when in terms of like long-term relationships, because I've never been in a relationship with a black guy or anything like that. Yeah. But I definitely noticed a difference in like the overall approach, for example. And this isn't even recently, I started going out with African dudes. So I just feel like, and I've even gone out with Asian guys, like on dates. It's just like the overall courting and just that initial contact is just different. That's what I can say. I feel like the Latin guys are more, I'm obviously stereotypically like traditional. Sure.
Yeah, more old fashioned.
Right, more old fashioned, more like detail oriented, like kind of like romance.
Yeah, more respectful, more gentlemanly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know, that's pretty much.
I'm curious though, because I remember you mentioned something about like, and I maybe I've heard this theme in other places, but like, is there a thing for a Black American girl that if she doesn't fit like this BET invented mold, then she gets rejected, and she has to be kind of like a black nerd girl or something?
Right.
There's something to that, and that made me think about the black girls that, you know, went to high school where I went to high school.
No, that's a real thing. And that for me, like, I noticed for a long time, I kind of had like cognitive dissonance. I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but like, I grew up in a household that was very pro-black and black people, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
But then kind of like my experience within my family and outside, I just was always rejected by black people. And it's weird because
why?
It's just always been a thing of like, I think I'm better than everybody, or I talk like this, or for example, I never been one to I've never like cookouts and stuff like that. So I'll sit in the car, or so it's always kind of like, oh, why are you wearing this? Oh, you don't want to, oh, you're lame. She thinks she like that. It's like really been like that.
Yeah.
So after kind of like I came to a conclusion where I'm like, fuck y'all. Like, I'm tired of like, because I kind of went through my Black Lives Matter phase back in like 2013, 2014.
Yeah.
And I used to write all my essays about police brutality and stuff. And then it just kind of got to a point where I started to, because I had like when I lived in Vegas, I went to white schools. But I never really hung out with white kids. I always somehow was with Asians, Hispanics, or mixed or Africans.
Yeah.
But I kind of I noticed I was having this animosity towards white people, but then I started to reflect on my life. Like, I have never had any issues with white people. All the problems I've had in my life have been Black people.
Yeah.
So then it kind of turned into this thing where I couldn't stand Black people for a while. And I had to get over that. And now I'm just kind of like, whatever I feel like and whatever I subscribe to is what I prioritize. I don't prioritize like the collective, because we just, in America at least, we don't really have that kind of like, we're not on code.
Yeah.
So I'm not about to like sacrifice my well-being or my life to be on code with people that are never going to be on code.
Yeah. And the close, that makes total sense. Cause then I think that the closest thing to code that Black Americans have comes from the Breakfast Club and BET. And it comes from like, you know, sorry to say, comes from bullshit, you know? It doesn't come from where I think historically it came from. I think in the South, Blacks might be safe, or they might have more protection toward this because they're closer to kind of this tradition, even if it doesn't exist, even if people don't go to church anymore and all of that, but the roots of that culture are still there, you know? Whereas I think when kind of you see communities outside of the South, those roots aren't there. And so then it's like, what fills those roots? What fills that vacuum? Well, you know, a DMX album or whatever.
Not DMX.
And then you have to question, it's like, well, who's, you know, like, where's this content being produced? Like, who's the ones making money off this shit? And, you know, those leads to some very interesting questions. You know, for me personally, I grew up in Inglewood, you know, which is kind of like a city that's, you know, mostly Black, but obviously very Mexican too. So it's like, and being Nicaraguan, like, I have Black family, so there was never like a racial hill for me to get over, because it's like, oh, you're just like another human, right? I didn't know you were Black. I didn't know you were white. You know what I mean? I thought you're just human. And so I grew up around, you know, like, I've been called a nigga by Black people my whole life. I didn't even know I wasn't. I don't even know to this day if I'm allowed to say it or not. I just been called a nigga my whole life. So it's like, yeah, I'm a nigga. What's up, nigga? Like, that's how we grew up, you know? And I grew very, very close. I mean, you know, like, and I'm proud of it because I feel like I've had a positive influence on some of my Black friends, because maybe I've been able to play that role of like a paternal figure that wasn't necessarily there. And it's not to.
They're gonna come in these. Look, now I'm having to pull an Xtina.
Well, you know, I'll bring my homies on the thing, and they'll say it themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's the culture, the predominant culture, and it's not exclusive to Blacks. No, I just think Black Americans are used as like megaphones for this culture, where it's like, it's dope to like come up on a bitch. It's dope to like get paid without working. All these things that like may sound cool at first, but then you start taking them apart, and what you realize is that it kind of, this is something I had to go internally myself, right? It's like it cuts away at your masculinity. You know, like, you know, you can't have an attitude towards women about she ain't nothing but a bitch to me. You know, it's like, no, like, you have to harken back to like, no, this is a lady. This is potentially somebody's mom one day. And so it's like, you see that culture. And again, this is what I dislike, that the association of this degenerate culture is a Black thing. And I think Black Americans do this to themselves. It's like they associate hood culture with Black culture as if they're one thing. And I know for a fact that they're not one thing, because of the blacks in Hispano America, right? My family, right? A part of myself. But also, like, historically, again, I think, you know, touching back to the South, where it's like there is a black culture that's not hood culture. It's just not what's put front and center. It's not what's popular. And so I think that culture is promoted around the world. You know, it's like everybody's, in a sense, kind of developing this like hood values, these broke hood values. You know what I mean?
Well, you know, okay, so I think the issue is like, and I've said this on a few of my things, and people get offended.
That's
I
just
think
life.
the problem is Black Americans refuse to distinguish niggas from Black people, for one.
Chris Rock.
And for two, a lot of the things that were previously a part of our culture, they are only able to really be passed down and sustained through like a traditional family structure, etc. So when you no longer have that, those traditions can no longer stand. And now you just adopt, like you said, the hood culture, and people, that's just become what it is. Mm-hmm. And one thing I talk about on my channel a lot, because I'll have people come and try to like, why are you acting like the spokesperson for Black people? This is not my experience, blah, blah. Like, there's this notion that what we see on TV of Black Americans is just TV, but I will turn off my TV and walk outside and see the same exact thing. So it's not just TV. And I genuinely do believe Black Americans that are still somewhat, I don't want to say traditional, but somewhat
well raised.
Ma, what the fuck? My door just opened.
Don't worry.
Oh, heck no. Yeah, my door just opened out of nowhere. But yeah, I almost wonder, I try not to project my experience on life, but I can't help but wonder, are the normal Black people in the minority?
Yeah, no, I would say so. I think that's been my experience. And I seen it like, because I grew up, like, one of my closest homies, Jamal. Jamal, what's up, boy? And Jamal, you see, I'm from Inglewood, and I went to high school in Redondo Beach, which is like, you know, it's not quite Beverly Hills, but it's going to feel like Beverly Hills from someone from Inglewood. And right. It's a high school that's 2 blocks from the ocean. You know, it's more like a college. It's a very interesting place. Obviously, there's tons of white kids. So I go there, and, you know, I'm the only Inglewood cat. And then there's this other Inglewood cat who saw me, and we could tell, like, we weren't from here, you know? Lo and behold, he's from Inglewood, too. So Jamal was from Inglewood. He's going to this white high school with me. And I wish Jamal was here. But I used to tease Jamal because I'm like, man, you're so white. Like, come on, get the hood out, you know, because I was like the ratchet kid, you know?
Right.
And you know, he was like, because he was the youngest, so he had older brothers that like went through the shit, joined gangs, went to prison, and his mom was like trying to get him out the hood by taking him to school in Redondo, you know? And so he was very kind of more of that calm, quiet, collected type cat. But, you know, looking back on our lives, and I think he would agree with this, it's almost like we had he ended up kind of getting swallowed by that culture, and I ended up kind of swimming away from it in a really weird way, you know, because he was Mr. Straight Lace and I was Mr. Hoodfella. And then it's like, we kind of switched roles. And I'm not saying that like he completely went down that route, but it wasn't the Jamal you would have thought when we were like in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. You know what I mean? Like something else came through. And to be honest, and I'll say this to him and his brother, I think a lot of it came from influence of his brother, because his brother came out of prison, and then it's like, you know, he's kicking it in the house, and, you know, now he's an influence. Whereas before, I feel like he had he was more defended against that type of thing. So it's unfortunate, but, you know, yeah, I see how that convergence, I see how those, there are like, it's like, I know there's a category in LA that we like to distinguish. We call them black folk. You know, like black folk aren't like the hood. You know, black folk are like, grandpa, grandma, they own property, they go to church, they actually own rental property. In Inglewood, you see this in the Crenshaw district, in that area, you do see this. But it's like over time, looking back as a little kid, it's like I feel like all the black folk have gone away. Like, where did all the black folk go? Like, did they die off? Did they move? Like, where are they? And I think that's an unfortunate thing. I think Black Americans need to fight against that, tooth and nail, because it's not good for society. It undoes your society. And I think one thing that's benefits all people in America is to see what has happened to black people. It's like a cautionary tale. And I'm not the type to say that this is all black people's fault. I don't think that at all. I think there has been systematic things, like these things are undeniable. There's a lot of what I call alchemy, but they'll call it social engineering. Like, when they took rural blacks out of the South and they moved them into cities of the North, they wanted to accomplish, the WASPs, wanted to accomplish two things. They wanted to break apart the ethnic Catholic neighborhoods, the Irish and the Italian neighborhoods that weren't speaking English, that didn't identify as white, that they had an ethnic identity, right? And then they built projects in the middle while these guys are at World War II, and they come back and it's like their neighborhood is gone. Oh, well, we'll sell you a car now that we have highway systems, and we'll sell you a house in the suburbs and you can live the suburb life. Well, what happened during that time? Well, Irish Catholics, Italian Catholics became alchemized into being generic white. Now the television's raising the kids. No longer do they live in the neighborhood. No longer do they have that church. No longer do they have that folk, right? And then the same thing happened with Black Americans, where it's like they lived a rural life. All of a sudden, the men are in a place where there's like beer and liquor and women and jazz and all the temptations of city life that you didn't have back home in the small town. And then you had things like, welfare, I think, was another tool that they use against the black family to break it apart. Where it's like, hey, we'll give you this check if you don't have a man at home. So then the man had to hide when the social worker came, or he had to leave. And over time, I think these have really negative effects on the family. And that's really the most important thing to preserve in any people, because it delegitimized the man, and it made the woman lose respect for the man, and it made the man lose his burden of responsibility as a man. So it's like, there's a temptation there. And then, you have blaxploitation films and the crack epidemic and gangs. And it's like, we know it from then on. But I think it's fundamental to see that alchemy of how you brought black folk from the South to Chicago, and then over 2-3 generations, the black folk has been gone out of them. And it's like, one of the things I emphasize is how people get stuck on racial identity. And I reject racial identities because I think it's pseudoscientific. It's very arbitrary. And I push forth an ethnic identity where race those aren't two of the same things, right? Like, Hispano is not a race, it's an ethnicity. And there's 3 races that make up fundamentally that ethnic identity. But I think ethnic identity protects people because it's built around the family. And I think Black Americans had that ethnic identity. And over time, it's been lost. And now it's like this pseudo-scientific racial identity where it's like anybody who walked through Africa is also black like me. They also descend from, sub-Saharan West African people. It's just, but what I notice is that white people do the exact same shit, right? White people here have also lost their ethnic roots. So then they fill that vacuum up with, they'll say they were the Egyptians, they'll say they were Romans and they were this and that. And it's like, it's not quite true. You're kind of stretching things to make it fit something. And you're feeling the pressure to do that because you've lost your folk. You've lost your family structure. You've lost your ethnic roots. And that contrast between Hispanos, again, when we first started talking, I said something like, I think I remind people of the way things used to be. I think Hispanos do that on a whole in the United States. They kind of bring people back to a more kind of genteel time where like women were women and men were men. And we opened the doors and we walked on the side of the street. These little things that we still preserve. And I think what I see is that we're under attack. Like our culture, we are in a culture war. And I don't apologize for that statement at all. I'm not trying to be conflictive. It's literally what I see. I think Hispano culture is trying to be alchemized by the West. And they're trying to take apart the family structure. And I think they've been largely successful, but there's just these weird, quirky things to Hispanos that kind of, even if when they go off the rails, like they'll be degenerate, but they'll still have 4 kids with 4 different women and they'll still take care of all those 4 kids. You know what I mean? So, not that that's good, but it's just, there's a weird way that Hispanos end up becoming degenerate. It's still a fruitful degeneracy, if that makes any sense.
Right. Like, basically in the dysfunction, like it's still in your fabric. So you still manage to like, in a way, preserve that.
Yeah. There's still like a natural essence to it, you know? There's still a natural essence to it. And so I think for me, noticing the demographic moment of where Hispanos are, right? Because we're overwhelmingly a young people, right? We're overwhelmingly in our 20s. We're at childbearing age. And there's a whole shit ton of us, not just in the United States, but when you zoom out and compare the whole continent, there's a shit ton of us. And so I get very defensive when I see like white Americans try to like come in and kind of do their intersectionality on us, or when black Americans do the same shit, because it's like, no, you're both gringos and you're trying to split our numbers apart. You're trying to get us to be divided, and you're trying to get us to reject our own ethnic roots, which I believe our ethnic roots are something that we should preserve. It's what allows us to be of my complexion, a blonder complexion, and a more African complexion, and yet still be related, still be at the same family party.
Right.
And so it's like they're trying to split the family apart. So I get pissed off. It gets me defensive, and I'm very vigorous about it. Like, you know, I'll call it out. I don't care who it offends. I don't care what it transpires to. If it means we're going to come to blows, like, fuck it. Like, if it means I die and I get arrested, fuck it. You know, there's something bigger than me in this world. And I don't want to see it because, you know, personally, I've mentioned that my wife is half black. You know, she'd be black if she grew up in this country. She'd just be black, right? So it's like, what's my son supposed to think? That he's illegitimate, that he has to adopt this gringo culture just because his mom is black? You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make sense. So I think Hispanos need to wake up and preserve this. And I really appreciate your channel because, you know, it's interesting to hear from an outsider. It's interesting to hear from an honest outsider of, you know, one of the things that stuck with me was kind of how, like, and I see it, like, you embrace your femininity. And it's like, femininity is not a Hispanic thing. Femininity is a human thing. But you see it more, you personally have seen it more expressed fully by Hispanic women because they're tied to that. And the question is like, well, why aren't black American women allowed to be as feminine?
Did you see my breakdown the other day?
I'm not sure. No. Was it like a kind of longer post you made, or was it
very long? It was like 4 hours. No,
I have not. I've seen part of it. Yeah.
Yes, I felt like I did a good job on that video, but so I want to
summarize it for me.
Huh?
I said summarize it for me.
So, okay, one thing. I'm done.
What happened?
Because I saw a video of something, and I don't want to get specific.
Yeah.
Of somebody performing a certain skill set. So I sent it to my friend who's in that same skill set for them to critique, and he just replied LMFAO. So I guess the person did a terrible job, but I'll tell you off camera. Basically, like, so one thing. And I did an interview with Radical Latino a few months ago. And the crazy thing about it is, and I will openly say this because this is just the nature of YouTube, I'm essentially a race hustler. My page started as a beauty page. And for whatever reason, that one video I did went viral. So I just kept making content like that because I realized there was like this parallel universe of these type of swirl couples. So a lot of people kind of look at me and categorize me like these black men who go to Dominican Republic and stuff. But the fact is, I'm just creating the content for people who want to see it because nobody was really creating that type of content.
Yeah.
But in my interview with Radical Latino, he asked me something, what do I like most about the Latin people? And I replied, I couldn't really like put it in words all the way, but I was telling him, I think it's interesting that Latin Americans tend to be like the most progressive people while still remaining like very like simplistic, because all of the basic aspects of society, like the food, the culture, the family ties, the community, they've mastered that. But at the same time, they're light years ahead when it comes to simple stuff like racial identity and being able to like mobilize and stuff like that. Because to be completely honest with you, it was weird because I've always been around people, Black people, who were very prejudiced against Hispanics, but I've always loved the culture. So I have, from day one, like since like 2000, I'm not born in 2000, but my earliest memories, like as a young kid, I remember people saying, these motherfucking Hispanics, they taking over the goddamn place. Every time I come back, it's more of them. They multiplying. So everybody can see it. And it's just crazy how like you said, for example, when I was in middle school, and I always tell this story, I had a very hard time in middle school. It was like the worst time of my life because I had moved back from Vegas to Atlanta. And in Vegas, it was kind of like more like Vans. You shopped at Hot Topic, you wore band t-shirts. But when I moved to Atlanta, it was like Jordans, Polo, Abercrombie and Fitch. So I was like lame, like I didn't dress right. So the kids were constantly attacking me. So I naturally fell back with all my Hispanic friends. And it was funny because even in like middle school at that time, it was kind of like this low-key like silent war between the Black kids and the Hispanic kids. Like the Hispanic kids stayed over here and the Black kids stayed over there. It was no in-betweens. So I remember I had a friend, and I still talk to her to this day. She's from El Salvador. Her name is Yanina. And I had another friend, Alejandra. She was Dominican and Mexican, but she looks Indian, like literally from India. But I had another friend named Jackie. She was Mexican. Another friend, Melissa. She was from El Salvador. And I remember my friend Yanina was like, are you Dominican? Blah, blah, blah.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did they think you were Hispanic?
They thought I was Dominican. And Black girls used to always be, she thinks she's Dominican. I was like, okay, so what I'm going to have to do to make this easier for myself is, yes, I'm Dominican. My dad is Dominican. So for the longest, like, I spoke Spanish and everything. So, wow. And my hair looked better than all the girls.
Yeah, like, I want to touch on that.
I literally went with it because for me, it was like a survival thing, because it was kind of like, it was so crazy how small-minded these kids were.
That's funny.
That if you hung out with Hispanics, you either were trying to be Hispanic or you had to be Hispanic. Like you couldn't just hang out with other kids.
You couldn't just, it's like the Black girls would force you to adopt their culture.
Right.
You couldn't be yourself and be Black.
Right. And what was crazy, this is how I know like the solidarity is like real when it comes to Latin Americans. I never told anybody, right? And these kids have been to my house and everything. Like I used to have my birthdays with them. I had Hispanic birthdays where, you know how like they'll like throw you up. They'll throw you up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I can't say
like,
that.
It was hella funny because all my mom's friends would be like every time I have a party, which house is it? Whose house? I see all these Mexicans, and it would be my party. But anyways, I said that to say it wasn't like those kids, like their moms loved me. I was just like one of them, right? Until we got to high school, and I'm like, yeah, I'm Black, da da da. And then it was like, okay, bitch, you're Black. Like, and it was kind of like, what I'm trying to say is like Hispanics, it doesn't matter what color you are.
Right.
If they know you're Hispanic, right, even an inch, like you're Hispanic.
Right.
But if you're not Hispanic, it's like, oh, okay, nice to meet you.
Right.
Like the solidarity is real. If you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, totally. If you're Hispanic, you could be a pink white guy with like, almost 2 steps from albino. But if you're from a Hispanic country, they're going to open the door to you like they're going to open the door to a relative. And that's the same thing no matter how Black you are, I had the same experience with my homie Jamal that I mentioned, we used to go to flyer parties in the hood, you know, in LA, and
What?
flyer parties. You know what flyer parties are?
That where you give a flyer out and you go?
But there was like a special type. What year? I don't know if you want to like share your age, but what year did you graduate high school, or roughly?
I'm gonna cut this out.
Oh, okay. Well, just tell me what you were born in the 90s or the 80s?
I was born in the 90s.
You're okay, so you're a little bit younger. So back in the day, they used to have flyer parties, and like you'd have like a glossy flyer, and it'd be like party crews who would throw this big ass party, and there'd be like nitrous Nas balloons. I don't know if you ever seen that. Like they'll inhale a balloon with laughing gas. It was just
Right.
people tended to get shot or stabbed at these parties. They were dangerous occasions, but they were fun as hell, of course.
Okay.
And so when there were like a really Hispanic flyer party, and you know I had my homie Jamal with me, then like we would all just like say he's Cuban, you know what I'm saying? Right. And so there was never like there was never a pause. There was never like, oh, yo, have a sip of my drink. Wait, no, you're Cuban. It doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm no longer measuring those little things that people do to each other.
Right.
And so, you know, like, I look back and I realized that the crew I hung around in high school, we had white guys too. We had Serbian and Polish guys, and they were all Hispanicized, because I think like their experience was the same, where it's like, you know, the Serbian and the Polish guy were first generation immigrants. So it's like they weren't going to be able to bond with the white people. They still had their traditions. They still had more of that old world view. And when here I'm in LA, who has the old world view? It's not the blacks. It's not the whites. It's the Hispanos. And so, of course, they're going to, you know, go that route. So it's real interesting. It's real interesting to see those pressures on the black girl. But how did you, okay, so in high school, you came out as a black girl. Right?
Right. So it was interesting because in high school, I was just real antisocial because I never really went to school. I had like a whole career outside of school. I was doing so much. I actually had a YouTube channel back then. But even in high school, with the few friends I did have, one of my friends is Puerto Rican and Black, but she grew up with her mom who's Black, but you would think her mom's Puerto Rican. So
got it.
She has no ties to Hispanic culture at all. Like, she's Blacker than me.
Sure.
But then she's still not Black enough to have this Black experience. It's weird.
Yeah.
So then my other friend, she's super proper, ballet, etc., but she's African American. So I ended up gravitating towards it seems like my experience has always been with those people that are outsiders.
Outcasts.
Basically. I also played soccer, so I had my African friends. So
I want to know more about that, because you mentioned Africans, and my family essentially raised a baby from Sierra Leone who was from it was a neighbor down the street who was looking for someone to watch her baby, and lo and behold, my abuelita, my grandma's here, you know, and so she started watching this kid from 8 months, and so this kid learned Spanish with a Nicaraguan accent, and abuelita is abuelita, and tío, tía, and all these things, and he was just kind of, I would say that Hispanics are very adoptive people. Like, we take people in. I think we get it from the Indians, where like the Indians would take, you know, anybody in and make them an Indian,
right.
So, you know, and eventually his parents passed away, and so that's kind of when we took him in, unfortunately. Wow. But while his parents was around, like, there was in looking back, like, I could see the vibe between his mom and my mom, even though my mom kind of looks Blasian. She's very yellow, like she's super yellow. She's very yellow, but she kind of has Afro features, you know what I mean? But she doesn't look black. People think she's Filipino, but it's funny how you can see like that communication between them two, where it was like they were able to connect on, I hate to say it, but it's like on this African level, like they were able to connect in a way that completely circumnavigates blackness as an American thing. They weren't connecting on being black. They were connecting on being African.
Right.
So I'm curious about that. How did you interact with these Africans, and then how could you compare that with Hispanos, since you've been able to deal with both?
I will say, in my experience, I think Africans are, this is just my experience.
Yeah,
And
of
this is
course.
my experience with you know, like not Sierra Leone, sorry, Liberians, Nigerians, Ghanaians.
Hmm.
I think I think when it comes to not Haitians, Caribbeans and Africans, I don't think Caribbeans, and that's why when I see black people, I'm like, y'all are goofy.
Mm.
They are not, it is not an open door policy with Africans. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think I found that my African friends and I connected on our spirituality
Mm.
and our morals. A lot of Africans that I've met are very Christian. You know what I'm saying? So I also have a Nigerian stepdad,
Mm.
and I grew up. It was interesting because for me, a lot of the black kids I knew had a stigma with Africans. They called them all kind of names and looked down on them. And I remember that growing up,
Mm.
but I never had that because my mom was always, it's interesting how I am with Latin culture. My mom has always been like that with African and Caribbean culture.
Mm.
So I always have been around Africans and Caribbeans.
Mm.
So for me, that's kind of what we connected on.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But they were not, it was not like a thing. It was just, we play soccer. Here's our morals and values. Hey girl, you know, kind of
I
thing.
got you.
And
It
their
was kind of
parents are like,
superficial, or
huh?
it was more superficial.
No, it wasn't superficial. It was just like, all right, we'll take you in, but you got to lead him outside.
Got
Like,
you.
even the parents are kind of like, when they meet me, they're looking at me,
Kind
and
of
then when they get
suspicious.
to know me, they really like me.
Yeah.
They're suspicious, right?
Yeah. That's, I mean, and look, man, that's coming from black Africans, you know? And so it's like, I feel like, I don't know what happened. There's something that happened to black Americans during Obama. There was a certain time, like, black Americans were here, and after Obama, black Americans were here. And it's like, before Obama, it was Chappelle's show. And the Bush years, you were probably a little kid, but you might have a memory of this. And I remember those years as a time where everybody was American, right? The fucking terrorists bombed us, and we're all American. We all got flags on our cars. And I remember race relations being very lax. Like, people didn't give a fuck if you made fun of their race. And that was my group of, like, I had Pakistani friends, you know, I had different race of friends, and we would always talk shit. Like, oh, you fucking beaner, because I did something very Hispanic. And I'd be like, you fucking cracker, or whatever the fuck. You know, it's just, it was comical. It was the time where, like, you know, I mentioned Chris Rock, niggas versus black people. Right? It's like, you could have these open discussions,
Right.
and nobody was going to get hurt. Nobody felt like it was personal, like you're trying to put them down. They would just give you something back, you know, and it was funny. It was funny. And then after the Obama years, I feel like I put my head down. I started my career and just kind of, you know, got off social stuff. But then it's like, I look back and it's like, now it's like intersectional, bisexual, Pan-Africanist, and it's like, what the fuck happened? Yeah, Black and X, exactly. Like, what the fuck happened, dude? And, you know, things now became PC. You can't say that. It's just, I don't fit into this world, you know. I really don't, and I'm fine with it. Like, I'm not trying to be a part of it. Like, to me, it's the Titanic that's already hit the icebergs, and it's just a matter of time before it cracks in half and everybody drowns. So I think what I try to push to people is, like, if you're smart, you're gonna realize there's not enough lifeboats, so you're gonna have to take chairs and tables apart and start building some rafts if you want to survive. And I think there's something that I empathize with Black Americans, you know, like, again, I grew up around them. I know them, you know, I speak Ebonics, you know what I mean? Like, I speak the language. So it's like, when somebody speaks Spanish, all of a sudden you can let them in. And I think with Black people, they might feel that thing once they get to know me. But I think there's an essence to the Black American experience that deserves honoring those ancestors, that deserves preserving some of that heritage. And I hope it survives that catechism that's coming, you know. I hope it survives. I think it should survive in its unique form, You know, I think Black Americans have a very unique experience that's led to some really impressive things that haven't happened in other parts of the African diaspora have shown themselves. You know, they've taken very unique forms, and I think these are things to preserve, but unfortunately, at least not in the popular space, you don't really hear these voices of people trying to preserve that thing. And I hope they do. I really do. So I'm sure a lot of the stuff I've said is going to piss people off. But again, you know, I wonder if they would have got pissed off, you know, back before Obama got elected, because back before Obama got elected, if you watch Chappelle's Show, if you watch Chris Rock, like, they wouldn't say that shit today. So what the fuck happened?
Right.
I'm still living in those years. Pardon my French, you know?
Right.
So, okay, take me back. So you had a Dominican dad in your head as a little kid. Then you embraced your blackness, and you went to high school, but you still kind of vibe with kind of the misfits of black women.
Right.
And some African girls. Okay. And now you're an adult, and now you see all that behind you. You kind of, you know, have climbed that hill. How do you see it? Where do you see it?
How I see it is, it's like you said, we live in a post-Obama world. So it's like, it's interesting because I told you, a part of my experience growing up, I had my dad, he was very, like, I guess, Hotep, like, you know, so, and I've brought this up before. I distinctively remember, do you remember the Jonas Brothers?
Yeah.
I remember I used to love them. I used to have, like, posters.
Oh my God. I can only imagine your dad when he walked into your room. He's like, is my son gay?
My son. I know. I get what you're saying. Right. So I promise you, he came in one time and ripped all of my posters off the wall and was like, you can only date black guys. Now, the interesting thing about it is I have an older brother who's white, half white.
Through your dad?
Right. I'm like,
why are you lying, Craig?
So it's funny because, like, all of these little experiences boiled up to, like, it's like interesting because people love to kind of say, well, like, it's almost like I have to be, especially black women, we're, like, expected to be the, like, glue of the community. Like, well, what are you doing? Like, you, I don't understand. This is your black brother. You're just going to make this video on YouTube and talk about these Latin guys like this? You know, what about, I've had people email me on my work email, my hair email, talk about, what about us brothers out here? And I'm like, what about y'all? Like, what does that have to do with me? You know? Yeah. Oh, anyways, back to the original question. Yeah. For me growing up, I told you I used to be like, when it came to the Socratic seminars and stuff, I was always writing about black issues. Yeah. And I was that kid in the classroom who kept bringing it up. Yeah. When everybody's just minding their business, the one kid who has to be like, is it because I'm black? I was that kid. Even though I had this whole weird experience and I got all these Hispanic friends, that's kind of how I was, like, socialized to be. So I still had that part of me. And it was interesting because right around that Trayvon Martin era, when everybody started to get real into it, that's when I kind of was like, fuck this. Like, I'm Sydney first. I'm a human first, blah, blah, blah. And then I started to see the shift. I'm like, I had this Salvadorian friend. I'm not going to say her name. She used to always say the N-word. And I would be the only one checking her, like, you stop saying this, da, da, da. Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to check her on Twitter about saying the N-word. I'm like, after all these years, right, none of y'all had nothing to say. Now everybody's in the uproar. Now she's Latinx and Afro-Latina. I'm like, what the fuck? Oh, my God. So it's weird.
So you've seen the same phenomenon that I was kind of talking about. It's not just me. Like, the culture.
No, it happened around that Trayvon Martin era. And essentially the conclusion I've come to is just, especially watching this year play out, the Black American community is unfortunately just the scapegoat for this whole New World Order. So it all led up to this moment to create all this tension and all this craziness and this chaos. And unfortunately, the Black American experience is just a part of what's being used to destroy this country.
Yeah, there's a Catholic scholar. He's German and Irish descent. He's an American. He won't call himself white. He'll say he's biracial. He'll say he's German and Irish, because he's very firm in his roots, right, in his Catholic roots. But he's a very interesting man. He wrote a book called The Slaughter of Cities, which highlights how the WASP elite used blacks as a proxy to break apart the Catholic ethnic neighborhoods. This is in the 60s. This is when the WASP were like, oh, shit, we have JFK. Like, is this country going to go Catholic now? And, you know, that's a very important dynamic to understand in the development of this country. But he's a PhD, so he's a historian. So he highlights how the foundations did this and how they basically used Black Americans as the shock troops, right? As the avant-garde of cultural revolution is the way he'll frame it. So I think if you're noticing that, I would definitely recommend his book and some of his work, because he highlights how basically those in power will use black people. And here's the thing. He'll highlight how like they use black people and then they let black people go. And then they use gays, right, as the new cutting edge of the revolution. And now they're kind of using both or a fusion of both. Because you notice a lot of this kind of Black Lives Matter or Black Power type movements, they're all lesbian black women who are the head of them. Like, if you love black people so much, why don't you make more black people?
Right.
You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And then all the strong black men who are about their shit, who take care of their kids, who have mortgages to pay, they get shut out. They're not even part of the conversation. Like, I'm thinking back to a neighbor of mine when I grew in Hawthorne, a different city. And, you know, he was like an OG black dude who grew up from Long Beach, like Crip, you know, from the hood. But, you know, he became an electrician, and it's like over time he became Hispanicized, right? And he was a single dad, you know what I mean? And I know for sure his opinion is not taken, you know, his words of wisdom are not part of the black conversation at all. I think it's my internet connection that's messing us up.
I think the
Can you see me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, it looks like you're back now. Can you see
Yeah,
me?
I can.
Okay, there you are.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think, to a degree it is true. And I think the unfortunate thing about this whole situation, I don't believe the Black American community, I think it's beyond repair. And I think it's beyond repair because, like I keep trying to tell people, I believe Americans, like you said, even the white community in America was just like a social experiment of how to destroy a society. So yeah. Now you see what happened in our community starting to happen in all communities. And it's just like this fight to preserve your cultural identity, because I don't know if you believe in globalism and New World Order, but there is no individuality in this new world.
Right.
There are no races. There is no this.
There's no group individuality. There's like a hyper individuality of a person, but he can't be part of a bigger group. There's no nation with a capital N, you know, and that's the thing, because they're anti-family, right? And it's like, you know, when all the riots kicked off and all these cities were being burned and all the shoe stores were being looted, I'm like, how come there's no Planned Parenthood that's on fire? I mean, from Roe v. Wade being approved to now, most abortions in the United States have been black babies that have been killed. I think we're talking about more than 40 million black babies have been killed. 40 million. That's how much black people there is right now.
Right. That's crazy.
And how come that's not talked about? That's not even mentioned. And when you look at the roots of Planned Parenthood, I mean, Margaret Sanger didn't mince her words. She said it straight up. I'm trying to kill black people.
Right.
And where's the uproar about that? Where's the offense about that? So it's like, what I see from an outside perspective, what I see is that I see a community that's dominated by women.
Right.
Where women are the word of wisdom. It is not men. It is not a patriarchal society. Right. And I see that weakness in the Hispano community, where it's like, or people where we are a patriarchal society, but we're also very matriarchal. We're not very clear on that. And sometimes I wish it was clearer. I think there's a lot of this kind of mommy cult Like everybody thinks their mom is the Virgin Mary incarnate, you know? And it's like, no, that's not your mom. And everybody disregards the dad and the role of the dad and the, you know, I think it was Chris Rock or somebody who said like, you know, the big piece of chicken was for your dad. I don't know if have you heard that skit?
No, but I know the concept.
Right. It's like, that's for your dad. And it's like that respect is gone in the Black American community. And I think everybody should wake up to it and say like, we cannot let women run things, man.
Right. What the heck is this? My email keeps popping up. This is getting on my nerves. Right. I think the issue is like the Black community is definitely a matriarch. And even in my own family, like I see it and it makes it, I have no respect for the men around me because they are just so weak. And the women are so strong. It's like repulsive to me. Yeah. And I hate to, you know, I know that's a strong statement, but it's just honestly how I feel. The issue though is it's like the reason I say it's not going to get better is because I feel like the people who acknowledge that and they want change, they're all recognizing like everybody's young. People who get it are not staying in the community. So it's leaving all the ratchets to devour themselves. Yeah. So I don't really see, I really just don't see any preservation in this community. Like, and I remember my mom years ago, she showed me this Time magazine where it said, what is the world going to look like in 2050? Or what is America going to look like, the average American in 2050? And they were a mixed person. It was a racially ambiguous person. You couldn't figure out what it was. And I just see that happening in Black America and eventually white America is like just all these mixed people and no real ethnic group, like you said.
Yeah, it's like a weird... Because Hispano culture, I highlight three roots. I highlight the Catholic Church and tradition, and I really emphasize the tradition more than the actual building or the church or the institution. It's more about this worldview that's very ancient and apostolic. You know, it comes from the apostles and the very early church fathers in the form of the Roman Catholic Church. The second root is the Spanish heritage, the language. It's like basically I like to like simplify it as like we all have a Spanish daddy and he got with it. That's the third root, the Indian girl or the black girl, right? And a mix of those two. Sorry, I forgot where I was going with this. What was the point you had just made?
Basically that we're being washed out.
Oh, yes. So like, because things are structured with God first, and like that's a big thing with Hispanos, like Dios primero. Like I can say I'm going to do this, all that, but it's Lord willing, right? It's like that's how we talk. That mixture of peoples was done in a way that was like informed by this higher worldview, this understanding of God, right? Through Christ. Whereas now the mixture is without God, and the mixture isn't about, you know, a divine hierarchy. It's not about, you know, glorifying God. It's just about it's about killing roots. It's about denying the Indian person his roots, denying the European or the African person their roots. And we're just going to become this mishmash, kind of ethnically ambiguous person. And I think that is what they're pushing, right? I think the elite of the world is actually seeking to enforce that. But I want to make that distinction where it's like, yes, you said it, like in a way, Hispanics are very progressive because they kind of already dealt with the race stuff long time ago. And they're like they're like post-race. And I would agree, but it's because it's informed by this proper theology, right? It's because, again, we don't have to be theologians here. We don't have to be Saint Augustine or whatever, but we understand that we're all made in God's image. We understand that we're all children of God. And I think that's fundamental, where it makes like, okay, I'm going to marry this woman who might be different from me, but my faith and my tradition is the one that's informing it. And It doesn't take away from this child. It doesn't make this child any less. And I think part of the people who have like this anti-Hispano thing where it's like, oh, the Spanish did think they were less. And I'm like, that's not entirely historically accurate. You know, Spanish in those days operated more like citizenship, right? Where it's like, I caught slack because I said this a little bit. I said that if you were a West African tribal person who was captured by another West African tribe, this is historically accurate, and then sold to some trader who tended to be Sephardic, man, my internet is going bad. Can you hear me? I think I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. What I was saying was that if you were a West African and they're going to throw you on a slave ship and you had the choice between a Turkish, French, English, Portuguese, or Spanish port, and I still stand by this, the best port you could have landed in was the Spanish port, because there's no other system where you could have landed a black African slave and died a white Spaniard with slaves. You know, there's no other system that would have given that African man a means of overcoming and empowering and being a full-fledged citizen to the point where his paperwork says he's Spanish, and you're not going to take that away from him, right? You're not going to take those rights and privileges, those legal rights and privileges away from him because he's earned them. So there was no other system to allow that. And I know that may sound harsh or insensitive, but that's the truth. And that's why amongst Hispanos, the African is so mixed, right? It's like the culture and like that essence of Africa has remained, but it's like you almost hardly see it in people, right? Like in Mexico, especially, like the supposed Afro-Mexicans, they don't even look African. They look like slightly darker Indians, you know. They do not look African, but you know,
right.
So,
right.
And I think Hispanos need to come to terms with this history, and like, because it serves people who want to destroy our culture and want to lead us down this path of killing those roots, installing matriarchy, just social decay. Their main tool is to get us to hate our Spanish daddy, right? And again, there's going to be Dominicans who are even blacker than you, right? They maybe never ever even mixed with Spanish, but the cultural father of the culture is still that Spanish essence, culture, and language. Right? It's like you don't have to have an Indian mom either, or a black mom. You could have a white European mom. But again, the culture here is that the mom is mixed, right? Hispano is a biracial or triracial person if you want to bring him down into race. But I'm talking more about culturally, spiritually. That is where our culture comes from. And so I'm really just trying to get people to embrace this thing. And it's nice to be able to connect with someone who's not of my ethnic group, who from an outside perspective sees a lot of the same thing going on.
Right. So what do you think? I don't know necessarily what your outlook is on the current state of the world, but how do you feel about like everything we just kind of discussed in your, I guess, agenda? How do you think it fits into where we are right now?
Well, I think we're at a cross, we're at a fork in the road here, and we really have to decide which way forward. And I think one of the crucial things to get our minds around is that value for patriarchy and order, right? Like living under matriarchy may sound nice, but it's just fucking chaos. And I think we need to come to grips with that and give honor to the father, because you ask people where you come from, they're going to tell you their mom, right? It's like, but you existed before you got into your mom. You were already swimming around in your dad, right? You came out of your dad into your mom. So the real source of you is not your mom. It's actually your father. That's the truth, right? Like even the sex chromosome comes from your father. We are our father's seed. And so it's like that order needs to be understood. And if it's not, then you're going to be prey to it. And I think I'd go with what you're saying. Like there is no hope. There's no saving it. And it's not exclusive to Black Americans. I think the whole world is going down this same toilet. White Americans are just behind you.
Right.
I think Hispanos are kind of on the rim of the toilet, and if we decide, we can grip ourselves very well right now, and that's kind of where I'm trying to push things. But I think what I would like to offer gringos, whether they're white or black, is that there is another way. You know, again, one of the things that I first noticed that sent me down this track was that black Hispanos don't have a chip on their shoulder, right? They're not angry at the world. And white Hispanos don't feel this weird sense of guilt that expresses itself in these weird kind of racial fetishes. Right?
I heard you talk about this.
Like, I don't see that down there, right? Like, race down there becomes complexion, right? It's like, you're just tanner than me, but you're not a different scientific subspecies. We just don't view the world that way.
Right.
And so I think...
You know what's crazy? Like, not to cut you off.
No, please.
As a hairstylist, I specialize in helping women grow their hair because that's just such a big issue with African American women.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because if you get it, and I literally have a book about this called The 5 Keys for Success in Your Healthy Hair Journey.
Nice.
This book is literally me addressing the mental things that are literally keeping Black women from growing their hair because they literally think they are some subspecies and they have to use this, you have to use this product and you can only wash your hair this day. Like it's so crazy how ingrained it is into the psyche that it's even affecting the hair to the point where I have women asking me, is it for Black hair? And I'm like, what is Black hair? Because hair is hair. There is no, it's
like a scientific thing that's Black hair is different. That's so interesting. And my wife, actually, I had shared with her your videos and she's like, oh, I need to see that. So my wife has like straighter hair, but it's still like at its roots, it's kind of African, but her hair is very thin. Like she doesn't have a lot of hair and I have a lot of hair. Like my hair is really thick. So I'm gonna have to put her on to your stuff. I didn't know you had a book because she's always looking. She's like, she's like taking when she was pregnant with our baby, like her hair poofed out, like she grew a lot of hair. But then it falls, so she's been like trying to pick up the pieces and like get them to stay. But and that's something that she noticed, and you did make a comment on this on Christina's page where it's like she's like, why are the Black girls? Why do they make those faces towards me? Because my wife, when she came here, her expectation was that like it was the pre-Obama Black American. She thought Black people were like funny and lighthearted. Like, again, I use Soul Plane as an example. She thought Black people were Soul Plane, And then she comes here and she's like, why are the Black girls mad dogging me the most out of anybody in LA?
Because I know you brought this up. If you could compare your wife, like, I guess her phenotype to any celebrity, what does she look like when it comes to like race, whatever?
I would think most people would say she's Black.
I'm saying, is she like a Zoe Saldana? Is she like a Gabrielle Union?
She's somewhere in between those two.
Because I asked because you have the Zoe Saldanas that are darker, but then they have a certain feature and certain hair. So it's kind of like, but then you have.
Yeah, I would describe my wife as having more of an Indian hair, like Native American. But again, at the roots, it is like more fluffy, right?
Okay.
Right? Like her baby hair comes in very African, but then it like transforms into Indian hair over length. But she doesn't grow that much. So it's thin, right? Okay. But I would say her face she's very fine featured face. But she is on the darker end of the scale. And she definitely has a Black girl's body. She's long, tall, and very curvaceous. Okay. Thank God for hooking me up with a pretty wife.
I'm trying to figure out, like, in terms of, and even though, like, that's part of what that video was that I did. It was really a response to Antonio Bautista's video. But
I haven't seen his video. But roughly he said that getting with Black girls is like downgrading or something like that.
Right, essentially. But the whole purpose of me creating that video was to address the elephant in the room that, from what I've witnessed, a lot of African American women do have a chip on their shoulder when it comes to mixed girls, biracials, or even Black girls who just are less and who are more ambiguous, I guess.
Sure.
And I don't think it's anything inherent. I think it really is like them internalizing the behaviors of their men.
Yes.
So that's why I asked when you told me she's experiencing that, because I'm wondering what does she look like?
Yeah. She looks like she doesn't look like a blonde black girl. She doesn't look like Mariah Carey, right? She
Mariah Carey is not black. I don't know where black
pulling
people
her
got
black card from. You see, this is their madness of the one drop rule in the United States. You know, I find it silly because again, we don't get stuck by these racial categories, you know?
Right.
And my wife never really had a racial consciousness, you know?
Right.
She didn't really understand the concept of race till she got here. And they're like, oh, these people are like getting me to think about what race am I, what bubble am I going to put in? She didn't have that consciousness. But I would say she's kind of a mix of Zoe Saldana and Gabrielle Union. Like she's in between those 2 points somewhere.
So
yeah,
you were basically talking about like the hair thing, because I know I cut you off. Basically how people were treated, the black girls were treating her differently.
Yeah, she felt like the black girls were rude to her and kind of mad dogging her when she's kind of like trying to smile and like, oh, my sister. she's trying to tap into her blackness, and like they're not letting her. And they're not letting her. She did notice a difference. We were in Florida not so long ago. She did notice a difference out there. And that's kind of when I explained to her, like, the South is different from the West Coast. Like people are more genteel and polite in the South than they are in the West Coast. But yeah, so she kind of felt that alienation, you know? And it's unfortunate, you know, I don't know what to say about it, but for me, it's like, I think what needs to be offered to Black Americans and white Americans, gringos of both colors, is that there is another model that if you take apart what informed your worldview, the history of it, there is a divergence that the Anglos took from old Europe, right? And it comes around the Reformation. So it's like now we're getting religious and theological, but these things have a profound effect over societies over time. You know, it's yeah.
So when I heard you talking about this in Christina's live, and this is a big reason I wanted to talk to you too, because I noticed you talked about alchemy, and
yeah,
I'm almost wondering, are you like hinting at this whole 12 tribes of Israel thing? Or when you say like, when you were essentially saying like Spanish just had a different spirit than the Anglos, like where are you getting at when you speak on that?
Well, it comes from religion. It comes from theology, right? The Spanish culture is Catholic culture, the old Catholic culture, right? Like the old school Catholic culture. That is what created Spain. Spain didn't exist until that happened. And Spain really came into being when the Catholic Spaniards pushed out the Jewish and the Muslim Spaniards and said either you convert or you get out. So that's really when Spain was born. And that the same year that happened, that's called La Reconquista, the reconquest. Excuse me. The same year that happened is the same year that they came to America.
Right.
And so the civilization came from this very ancient apostolic form of Christianity. What happened in England and Northern Europe is the Protestant Reformation, which is anti-Catholic. Some Catholics might say that it's a Judaized form of Christianity. So it's like you got rid of these certain traditions, these theological viewpoints. Like I'll give you an example. Catholics will say that the Virgin Mary is the mother of God. They have no problems ever saying that because they understand that Christ was both God and man, right? It was God taking man form, and you can't divide his manness from his godness. It's what they call hypostasis. Both things exist at the same time. So it's almost like Christ is a spiritual mestizo, right? He's a spiritual mulatto. He's both things at the same time, separately yet together, yet not mixed. Yet you get what I'm saying? They're not in a tension with each other. Somehow they're in a dynamic union with each other. Okay. Now you ask a Protestant, hey, is the Virgin Mary the mother of God? And they'll be like, no, that's a heresy. You're praising, you're saying that this woman birthed God. Well, then you ask them, well, is Jesus God? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'm like, then how is she not his mother then? Because if Jesus isn't God and if he's just a man, then he's just some man to follow who had some good ideas, right? But the whole worldview from a Catholic viewpoint, and the Orthodox is the same thing, you know, whether you're Roman Catholic or Greek Catholic, whatever you want to call it. But in their worldview is, no, this is God took flesh through this woman. And since you can't divide his godness from his manness, by default, this woman is the mother of God. And there's no problem me saying that. Now, this may seem like, okay, what the hell does this have to do with race relations? Well, the connection is that by God taking physical form, right? Matter, right? This is all physical. He, in a sense, legitimized matter. He gave matter an ability to be sanctified. And so when we're saying that, okay, this is, you know, just 3 months ago, this black African woman was running through the jungle, and now she's here working on my farm, and you know what? She's kind of cute. I'm gonna put a baby in her, right? I'm gonna marry this girl. What you're saying is this woman is made out of matter that is just as apt to be divinized as anybody else. What you're saying is that this woman is made in the image and likeness of God. Whereas the Anglo worldview is informed a lot by Calvinism and the Talmud, and that will position it more like, no, we are the real humans, and those are like monkey humans. They're not quite as evolved. And where does evolution come from? It comes from England. There shouldn't be a surprise there, because basically, and if you zoom in the politics of white identity, you see that, well, Italians, they're kind of like associate white. They're not the real whites like us English boys. So
right. You're white when we gotta like mobilize.
Yeah, when we need people to come put in work.
Right.
And that is the history. I mean, you can't get away from it. And I feel I empathize with white Americans, because it's like they're kind of like this Amerimut. You know, they're like, I'm French, Italian, English, Irish, blah 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 blah. Like they've lost, you know, and so it's like that is kind of sucky. That it's like you're an Amerimut. You no longer have this ethnicity informed by these very deep, profound concepts, right? Fucking internet, man. There.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So yes, that is a fundamental difference that Anglos have, and by default, Black Anglos have, right? Because your form of Christianity came from the Anglo Christianity, not from the traditional Catholic Apostolic Christianity. And I have this problem when Afrocentrists say that Christianity is a white religion. Ethiopia has been Christian since before, you know, Rome was Christian. There was Christians in Ethiopia long before. So it's like, you can't come up with that. You know, that's not going to work.
Right.
But yes, Black Americans have been kept from this tradition. But Blacks in Latin America haven't. And again, these things may seem very cerebral and like, oh, what's the connection? There is a profound connection, because it informs how you see the world. It makes someone from being a subspecies of human to someone being, oh, just a tanner version of me.
Right. And it's interesting when I heard you like kind of talk about this on Christina's channel.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it was a good point that you brought up, because now you see African Americans now putting that same ideology on white people, like they're a different breed, they're not human.
Oh yeah, you totally see that.
So it's just like this.
I'm original man.
Right. And it's just like, it's the craziest thing ever, because I've just accepted the fact I'm just out here in this world. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, I just, it's weird. It's like, it's just weird. It's just a weird little pocket of society.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a weird like the fundamentals of the situation is really weird. And it's like, how does a person in your situation navigate and thrive? It's a difficult situation to be in, I would assume, you know? And that's why I don't get mad when like Black guys are trying to get with Hispanic girls, because it's like, they're just looking for something that all women used to be able to offer, but they can't find it in their women anymore. And the same thing.
Well, I think, and I don't even mean to cut you off.
Yeah, please.
But I was thinking about this. Do you know Kim 123?
Yeah, I actually chatted with. I don't know him, but I did hop on his show last week.
Right. He had did a video like responding to my video, but
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like I can I can understand where Black American men are coming from when they take that angle. But I think the reason it's not really sustainable because they're taking the same issues kind of like
Yeah.
over there
Yep.
is
Yep.
because they don't have the masculinity to deal with the feminine women.
Yep.
So it's like all parties involved are, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and it's kind of like a thing where at some point, like I guess for survival, you kind of got to evolve to be able to, if you're going to make that transition, you got to have a mindset shift. You can't carry those same, and that's the kind of same thing I feel about Black women. Like, because it's not even something I thought about. This is just, again, a YouTube channel I did for fun.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of noticing the same things. For example, one common thing that came up when I made that first video was, well, what do you mean? There are Black Latinos. Duh. I'm sure everybody knows this by now, but at the end of the day, like there's still cultural differences that you have to acknowledge.
They're Hispano. They're not identifying by their color purely. You know, that's a secondary identity.
Right. And it's like if you're gonna take that route, if both parties involved are deciding that they're splitting up from each other and going to white wherever you're gonna go, it obviously the values and traditions you're using over here aren't working. You can't go and force that on the other people because now it's creating a ruckus where at once you could have just slid over there silently and shut up, had your one relationship. Now you're making it a whole thing to now people don't like you. And now I can't really describe it. But do you get what I'm trying to what I'm insinuating?
Yeah. It's becoming a thing when it didn't have to become a thing. It could have just been
it's a thing,
nature doing its thing without anybody having to mention it.
Right.
Yeah, I see it. And I think what's crucial, like, you know, my take is like people are going to mix, like men and women. Like it's not just Black women and Hispanic girls, you know, but it's also Hispanic guys taking Black girls. Right. I think it's fine to do this as long as that people understand, well, what is the culture that I'm leaving and what is the one that I'm seeking? What are those values that weren't working out for me, which is why I left and sought to join somewhere else. Like I have a cousin who married a Jamaican guy, right? And I grew up with him. Like they were a young couple when I was a kid, so I was like their baby before they had a baby, right? I was the one that they took out. And now they're divorced, right? But he lives in TJ now, right? So he didn't want to fuck with America anymore. He just wanted to move to Mexico. And this is a Black.
Your phone is.
It's not my phone. It's my computer.
You're breaking up. You said now he lives in TJ?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I mean, your computer. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. You said now he lives in TJ?
Yeah. He lives in Mexico.
Can you hear me?
Man, it's really my fault. I don't know what the hell is up with my internet. I might have to unplug it and replug it in. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Does it look like it's working now?
Yes, I can hear you the whole time. It's just the sound.
Oh,
but it's okay now.
Okay. It's I should have something's up with my modem. What I was saying was that this relative of mine, even though he's divorced my cousin, he's still family, right? He, after divorcing his Nicaraguan wife, decided to move to Mexico. You know, like and now his new wife or his new girlfriend is Mexican. So, you know, he became Hispanicized. He said, like, this is where I want to be. This is the way I want to live, you know? And I think it's odd because their breakup came apart because my cousin became very Americanized. It's like she had let go of her Nicaraguanness, right? Of her Hispanicity. She had become Americanized. And then it's like, I'm dating you because you're Hispanic and then you became white. So it's like I'm not dating the same person anymore.
So did you date her for her or did you date her for her culture?
I think he dated her for her culture.
Right. Like, And I feel like that goes back to almost like, I don't want to say fetishization, but kind of like,
Well, I think when you
I
see
don't know.
when people criticize like sex tourism, because that's what it is, right? These guys are going on sex tourist trips and they're getting prostitutes from Latin America. It's not like they're getting the ladies from Latin America. They're getting prostitutes from Latin America. That is a physical lust, right? It's all about sexual gratification. You're not recognizing something higher than the body, which culture is higher than the body. Hold on, Sid. Give me 2 minutes. I'm gonna have to unplug this thing and replug it back in because it's being obnoxious. There we are. Can you hear me?
Hear you. Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, it came on pretty quick.
Yeah, I had to unplug it. I don't know what's up with my internet. I got to deal with it.
Selection.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, to kind of try to conclude here, like, I think what everyone has to do is to find their ethnic roots, find what informs their ethnic roots, and seek to preserve that and feed that. You know, you can't go back in time. There's no way any of us are going back in time. But there are things of value from the past that need to be protected and valued today. And that's an exercise that everybody has to do. Every ethnic group has to do if they want to survive. If not, what will happen is they'll become another ethnic group, or they'll be absorbed by other ethnic groups, which I think is kind of what you're seeing happen. And I have this joke. I say that the West, the so-called West, I use a term called jam culture. And that's Judeo-Anglo-Masonic. That's that culture. And I say that culture is fundamentally opposed to Hispano culture. And it all revolves around this religious concept that I had laid out for you. But they're diametrically opposed. But I say that the future of America, jam culture creates JAWs, JAWs, Jewish, African, white. So it's like and this is a joke, and I'm busting balls when I'm saying this. What I'm saying is that the future of America is Drake and Doja Cat. Like, this is what's going to happen. And what you have to know is that Americans, Anglos, have always like made fun of us for race mixing, right? They make fun of the Spanish for being like mixed of different things, right? They'll make fun of Hispanics because they're a mix of Spanish and different things. And it's like, yeah, well, we've always been race mixing, and it seems to be working out pretty well for us. We're still having kids. We're not having the same issues as you guys. Maybe we don't have as much money as you, but we have what's important in life, right? And then now what you're seeing is you're still seeing race mixing in jam culture in the West, but it's like a soulless race mixing. It's not rooted in the right perspective. So as a joke, I say like that is what's going to be the average American in the future is going to be a guy who looks like Drake.
Right. That's what that Time, I don't know if you heard me about the Time magazine.
Yeah, so I'm not crazy.
That was the article they came out with years ago. So that's essentially the agenda. And if you look on the TV, you see a lot of it being promoted, like interracial dating.
Yeah. And it's like become cheesy. Like before it didn't get promoted and people were like, hey, like some of us are dating different people. It'd be nice to see it. But now it's like everybody's interracially dating. And it's like, come on. So now you know that there is an agenda behind it, right? And again, because it's not informed by the right worldview, it's not informed by the right theology. It's like a perverted form. It's like the example of my Jamaican relative saying, like, yeah, I'm in love with the culture. It's the values that I'm in love with. I'm not fetishizing over somebody's physical appearance because the body disintegrates eventually. No body lasts forever. But cultures have values that transcend time. And I think that's the proper way to go about it. I'm not necessarily like a pro race mixing or an anti race mixing guy. I just want people to be aware of why they're doing it. Like I've dated a ton of girls from different races and different ethnic groups, But at the end of the day, I ended up marrying a Colombian girl, right? Who's from the coast of Colombia, is very much the same as Nicaragua. It's like I ended up marrying exactly where I started from. And I think what people realize, whether this makes people uncomfortable or not, but when like you go for someone of a different race, is like you might have an issue with one of your parents, right? Like symbolically. And I think that was my thing. Like I did not want to deal with my mom. And so I was dating Persian girls and, Ukrainian girls or whatever the heck. But then it's like I made peace with that, and it's like, I want to be with where I come from. I think that's only natural. But again, my wife is under an American worldview wouldn't be my race. But again, because we don't see race, she is my race. Yeah, we're the same group.
Right. It's facts.
Yeah.
Oh, well, are you on Instagram?
I'm not. I mean, I have an Instagram account. I'm just not active on it. I'm getting organized. It seems like this thing is kind of starting to develop a life of its own. A lot of Hispanic men and women, but overwhelmingly men, have reached out and said thank you, both whiter Hispanics and blacker Hispanics. They're like, thanks, because it's like, fuck, I felt this pressure where it's like I have to choose one of these sides. And it's like, it's nice to know that there is a third choice all along. I knew there was, but I haven't been able to put it into words. So it's like this level of consciousness that's developing is taking a life of its own. So I'll slowly get more organized. But if you want to find more of my stuff right now, the best place is YouTube, OG del Rancho. And we'll be bringing in more different types of content. So far, the thing that we've done a lot is just kind of these weekly conversations around these deeper subjects that we take apart, and we have different guests. But it'll start becoming a little bit more consumable, and we'll get on Instagram and all that stuff. I keep getting banned on Twitter, so.
Right. That's what Xtina said. I was like, what's his contact? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Twitter, they have all kind of pornography and everything.
That's what I'm saying. They have little girls. They have anything. I just, I kept getting suspended because I kept beefing with white nationalists, and I kept like checking them and putting them in their place with their bullshit. And they're the ones who snitched on me over and over and over again. And it's funny. It's like, because again, my position is very nuanced. Like, I'm all about embracing our roots, right? Or we should embrace our Spanish side just as much as we embrace our African or Indian side. We shouldn't put one over the other. Now, there is a hierarchy because, again, I came out of my dad before I got to my mom. So there is an order. And again, this is reflected in the family unit, right? The family cannot be a democracy of mom and dad. There needs to be one person leading it and responsible for its success or its failures above anyone else. And that should be your father, right? I get it. Our fathers don't always measure up to this, but that is where we should try to measure up to. So yeah, as soon as I start putting this position, we're like, no, let's embrace our roots. I'm not like Andy who says like, oh, the African side of me doesn't matter. It's like, I like whatever percentage of, I'm never going to do a DNA test. But if you took the colors of the people who my ancestors are, I would say that I'm a third African, I'm a third Indian, and I'm about a third Spaniard, right? Like that's the colors of my ancestors. That's how they worked out. Right. But I would never reject or deny that. I don't see why you would wake up and feel like, oh, it sucks, man. I had to be born on the black side of the road today. Like that's retarded to me. I understand where they're coming from, but I still think it's retarded. And then I don't go on the other side where it's like, oh no, my Spanish ancestors all raped my Indian ancestors. And it's like, no, that's not true. That's not true. And at the end of the day, it's just a disguised way of rejecting patriarchy, right? Like the Latinx girls who hate our Spanish root hate the patriarchy. They hate fathers in charge of families. That's really what they're rejecting. And they hate the concept of God, who is our Father in heaven. So that's really what it's about. It has nothing to do with Spain. It's all to do what Spain symbolizes in our soul and our psyche. And it is the father of our culture, just like you have a father in your family. And if you reject that, then you got daddy issues. So yeah, more of that stuff will come out. It's been fun. I'm really glad to connect with people like you, man.
Yeah, this is a definitely a different interview because it's interesting because I really cater to Mexicans on my channel. I don't really cater to other groups because Mexicans are just so easy to deal with. Like you have a few bad apples that come, but in my experience with Mexicans, they really don't do the race thing. So it's very easy to make content for Mexicans. Either they don't like it. If they don't like it, they simply don't comment. Or if they do, they respond and they support. But then when you start getting the Dominicans involved and the people with more mixed backgrounds, that's when it becomes a thing. And I think just the conclusion I've come to, I always notice with the Latin people, it seems like the darker Hispanics, this is just my experience.
Yeah, it's just your observation.
This is just from my observations, they tend to be more like color struck, more, I don't want to say racist, but more into those types of politics.
Like in denial.
The conclusion I've come to, and a part of me is like, I don't know. Okay, so I have some language partners who I've never met in real life, but we consistently talk.
That's so cool.
And I want to say it's an American thing, but I'm like, maybe it's the Dominicans over there too. But I think maybe they're so tired of being associated with Black Americans and Haitians that kind of comes out as racism because they don't want to be associated.
Yeah, because they've associated Africa or Blackness with Black gringo degeneracy or Haitians, causing problems on my island or on my half of the island. And I said this to Dominicans, and like, I think some of them were like, it was like when the DJ comes in with the cut noise, like, yeah. But
you know what's funny? I said that's what 2020 was like. Everybody was partying, and then it was like, but anyway, what?
Right. That's the essence of this year. It's an interesting year. But I told Dominicans that. I said, I think the racial hangup comes from like you're associating your Africanicity, you're equating it to Haitian Africanicity, you're equating it to Black American Africanicity. And here's what I'm proposing is that Hispanos embrace their unique Africanicity because it's very unique and it's very special. And, coming from the Caribbean basin, like, it's fundamental, I understand in Mexican culture, the Africanicity isn't quite the same. But again, by virtue of being Hispanic, Mexicans can tap into the Caribbean culture. Andeans can tap into the Caribbean culture and vice versa. Right. I'm Hispanic and everything that is of Hispania is also of me, even if I'm not from there. Right. So I can enjoy tango, even though if I'm not Argentinian. It's just the way our culture works.
Right.
But yeah, there is a unique dynamic in Dominican Republic, and I do empathize with it. But I think the answer to it is not to reject either our Spanish side, which is something what radical Latinx will say, or our African side, which is something that Andy will say. It's embracing both and saying, embracing both, again, like, even if it's 2% sub-Saharan African that you have in you, that 2% in your DNA might be your eyeball. Can you live without your eyeball? Like, that's your African eyeball. You cherish it, right? God gave it to you. And that is the default Hispanic attitude towards race, which is why I had talked about how like we have this thing where we're very adoptive of people. Like, I don't know if you saw on Christina's channel, she had put this Black girl who had got adopted by a Mexican couple and like actually lived in Mexico.
Right.
Did you see that? It's like here's the truth. Like, you'll never see a Black American couple adopt a Hispanic kid and bring him up in their culture, right? Like, that's not going to happen. But why is it that this Black American girl was able to be raised Mexican and benefit from that, right? And her husband's Mexican, right? And you're not going to take Mexico away from her, even if it's not in her blood, it's in her spirit, right? And this is how Hispanics roll, right? We're not going to get theological and intellectual on you, but this is how they see the world. There is something above the body. There is a spirit of things. And that's really how they live life, which is very different from the Anglo worldview. And so you can't group Spain and England and say, oh, the white man came and did this. It's like, they're not the same white man. They don't even look the same. Some Spaniards look Arabic. So
just because I don't want to have you here forever.
No worries.
One last thing I wanted to talk about, and this, when I talked to Christina, no, Christina was in my chat while I was live one day, and she brought up a really good point that I never really thought about. And that point was on my channel, it's like one thing that kind of gets on my nerves, because it's just the denial for me. You know, people say it's the shirt for me, it's the denial for me. Like, when it's like anytime you have a conversation about mixed race Latinos, especially those who have like more African ancestry, it's like there's always a Black American in the background saying, look, I have a cousin that looks like that. And to me, it's just like, because I guess I just see myself as being more honest. I'm like, no, your cousin doesn't look like that. Your cousin looks like this. You know what I'm saying? And it's like Christina brought up such a good point, because I always tell him it's the features. Like, no matter what you do, the features are different, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes you might get like one that kind of looks like, oh, she looks like she could be whatever, but it's still, Christina was basically bringing up the fact that like that mixture is different because you have the Spanish mixture and the Anglo mixture. And I'm like, I never even took it there.
Oh, yeah. Because American mulattoes don't look like mulattoes from Colombia or Nicaragua.
Right. Right. It's the features are just not the same.
Yeah. Totally. I would agree. And I think even the United States, this is the thing, man. And it's sad because there's a lot of interesting histories in the United States. Like Louisiana is a whole other world, right? Because it was like a French colony. And you have like the red bones, right? Where it was like the blacks and the Indians mixed. And so you have a lot of these interesting mixes that like aren't even talked about. The Creoles, Black Creoles is another interesting group of people. These are real ethnic groups, by the way. And again, they've been alchemized to now be a generic black.
Right. You're right. Because there's even this concept that's been, I don't know if do you have to go? Because I will.
No, Mama, no, I'm cool. Don't worry.
I don't even know what time it is.
It's probably late for you, but I'm cool.
Another thing that's interesting to me is like, this is one thing that just kind of is, and I won't take one of them ancestry DNA tests either. So it's just whatever. But it's kind of like this unwritten or this story that you can't really finish because you don't know the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I understand.
And for example, like my family on my dad's side, there's something, we just don't look like any of the other people in our family. And I found out that my great grandmother, nobody knows who her dad was. And her mom was kind of like, it's just, there's like all these random things where you find out you're not even related to people that you thought you were related to. So it's like, there's a concept of these, have you heard people saying that there are African Americans that were indigenous here?
Yeah, I've seen that Afrocentrists like to say that the Indians were actually Africans.
Right. And it's like you have some who just try to say the Olmecs and everybody was black. But then you have these others that I guess they feel like they were a tribe that was here too.
Well, I can't see it far-fetched. To think that all the Indians came through the Bering Strait of Alaska, I think is a little far-fetched. I wouldn't rule out that there might have been some interactions with Africa. I wouldn't rule out there was interactions with Asia as well. I think perhaps there was like a certain root of people who mixed, again, depending on where the boats came from, those people might have gotten absorbed. But what you see in America and from the United States is that a lot of this is what happened with Spain and England, right? Florida was a border state, right? It was the Spanish Empire met the English Empire. And the Spanish said, look, we're going to make Florida our black colony. All the freed blacks can come here and they can have their colony. And in fact, all the African slaves who run away from Anglo-America, as soon as you get here and you become Catholic, you'll have freedom and rights as everybody else. So a lot of blacks actually went into Florida and they mixed in with the Indians in Florida. So this is where what
are they called?
Seminoles, black Seminoles.
Seminoles.
Yeah. And this happened a lot. I mean, not only just in Florida, but there was always a thing where like blacks would fight or run away and go and form a community in the mountains. And the Spanish would basically let them do it. Like, they're like, we're not going to go fight these people. Like, just send a priest, build a church, whatever. Let them have their town. You know what I mean? Like, that was kind of the Spanish way of doing things. But what happened over time in Florida was that once Florida was sold to the Americans, then the Anglos came in and they started killing the Indians who were now half black Indians, right? And guess where those Indians went to find refuge? Mexico. They went to Mexico.
Okay.
They went to Coahuila, Mexico, right? The Mexicans let them in and said, yeah, you can have land here. Like, go ahead. Because you're Catholic, right? Like, culturally, we can vibe now, right? Now we speak the same language. And these are things of history that aren't even mentioned. But, I was curious about you. Like, I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if you had some Native American admixture. I mean, it's not far-fetched. I mean, these people were living next to each other, Right.
And that's the weird, I just don't understand. Like, and this is another thing that's always intrigued me about Latin America is like, what's crazy to me is how Latin America managed to preserve all of the history. Like, how did all these Indians here basically get wiped out? I've ran into Native Americans here and there. But how do you have this high concentration of indigenous people in Latin America and then all the ones here just mysteriously are gone?
Well, that shows you the difference between the Spanish and the English, right? The Spanish understood, like, why can't I make this woman my wife? If she's Catholic, why wouldn't she be my wife? Why wouldn't I recognize the children that I have with her, which is something that the Anglos never did, right? They would have sex with their slaves, have children, and let those kids stay as slaves. I mean, that's so fucked up. When you look at records of like a Spaniard, from the empire, right? During the empire days, like you'll pull up a person's paperwork and all the churches preserve people's on their death certificates, their baptisms, all this stuff. So you'll find a man who, let's call him Jose Antonio. Jose Antonio's death certificate says he's white, and his will says, he had a daughter with an Indian lady when he first came out here, and so he's going to grant this daughter, X amount of belongings. Then he had a Spanish mail order bride, so he married the Spanish girl, and he had 3 kids with her, and they're each getting this thing. But then it shows that, he also had a house slave, and he knocked boots with her, and so now he had a kid with her who has his last name, and now he's granting his baby mama freedom, and now giving that mulatto child X things, right? And then it'll also show something like, and there was a neighbor from down the street who couldn't take care of their baby and gave him the baby, and the baby kind of got raised in the same household. And then when you look at Jose Antonio's birth certificate, he's not a Spaniard. He was a mulatto, right? So it's like, how did Jose Antonio, the mulatto, become a Spaniard? And now he's having kids with all these different women, but what's the pattern with all the kids? They all took his last name, and they all got a piece of his inheritance. All of them. Which you never saw that happen in the Anglos. One of the reasons why slavery got banned that a lot of people don't talk about is because the white women kept noticing that their slaves kept getting lighter every generation. So clearly somebody was double dipping, right? And because the English are so uptight and proper, they can't talk about these things openly. And that's one of the big motivations behind the anti-slavery movement in the United States before the Civil War. It was basically white women from the South tired of their husbands cheating on them with their black house slaves, which they were doing on the regular. And so it's like, this is a joke that I make with my black friends. I'm like, you think you're so black, but the moment you step foot on Africa, you'll realize how white you are.
Right. And that's what I tell people, like, in my limited travel experiences, whatever Donald Trump did, everybody was coming at me like I was Donald Trump. So here, but the Australians or whoever were giving me that same energy. So, but that's interesting. So I appreciate your time because I know it's been a while,
it's been a pleasure. Anytime. I mean, I'm sure this is going to cause some stirs with people, and I'd love to hop on live, and obviously when I get to that point too, I'd love to have you on.
Right.
No, I'm just glad that we connect because, you know, it's through these conversations where we're able to at least like get a bearing and try to navigate these pieces of rafts that we're all going to have to navigate to somewhere better than where we started from. So it's
Right.
good.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Make sure you go and follow. What is your Instagram?
OG del Rancho on YouTube. Yeah, just search up OG del Rancho. You'll see me on there.
All right.
Cheers.